Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, thank you both for being here with us today virtually and for your commitment to constantly improving the way your platforms are serving people across the country. There has been a lot of talk today. Many of us have been listening from our offices or online about the censorship of ideas and news on your platforms. And these are the things that have been at the forefront of Americans' minds in the lead up to the election, as well as the weeks since our 2020 general election. And, you know, the people that I hear from, of course, believe that conservatives were wrongfully being silenced, while those on the left that were given basically free reign of your platforms. And one of the points of contention that is often brought up is that you do recruit heavily from California, which leads to your employee base skewing quite heavily to the left. So my first question is for both of you. Do you have concerns about your ability to monitor disinformation on both sides of the political aisle equally, given that the majority of your employees typically do lean towards the more progressive side? And again, to both of you, have you taken any steps then at all to make your employee base more representative of the country as a whole when it comes to political affiliation? And Mr. Zuckerberg, if we could start with you, please.
Thank you, Senator. I think that this is those are both really important topics. In terms of assessing what is misinformation, I think it's important that we don't become the deciders on everything that is true or false ourselves, which is why we've tried to build a program of independent fact checkers that we can work with on this. And those fact checkers are accredited not by us, but by the Independent Pointer Institute for Journalism as part of the International Fact Checking Network. And it includes fact checkers that I think span the political spectrum, as well as I think the majority of them who would call themselves apolitical. So we've tried to address the issue of making sure that there isn't a bias in our actions by actually having us not be the deciders on that type of content ourselves. And to your second question about taking steps to diversify the employee base, this is a sensitive area in that I don't think it would be appropriate for us to ask people on the way in as they were interviewing what their political affiliation is, which of course makes it hard to know what the actual breakdown of the company is on this. But one of the areas where I'm more optimistic over time is I think we're going to see more people working remotely around the country and also around the world, which will mean that fewer people and smaller percent of our employees will have to come to the cities and areas like the Bay Area where our headquarters is, and we'll be able to employ an increasing number of people across all of the different geographies in the country.
Very good, thank you. And Mr. Dorsey?
First and foremost, the most important thing is that we built systems and frameworks independent of any one particular employee or individual at our company. And included in that system are checkpoints. Checkpoints to make sure that we are removing any bias that we find, checkpoints to do QA and monitoring of all the decisions that we make, having an appeals process, which is an external checkpoint on whether we made the correct enforcement action or not. So we want to build something that's independent of the people that we hire, and that is our focus, building a system. Second, like Mark, I'm really excited that we are at a stage where we can decentralize our company even more, that we do not need people to move to San Francisco, that we can hire people all over the country. They can stay where they want to be, wherever they feel most creative. And that's not just in this country, it's around the world. And I think the tools are in a state where we can do that more easily. We've obviously been forced to do it with COVID, And I don't think it's a state that we will return from. With the days of having one centralized, massive corporate headquarter in any one particular city are certainly over for us, at least, and I think many other entrepreneurs starting companies today.
Yeah, very good. I really appreciate that, and I think that COVID has taught us all a very important lesson, and for those to be able to work remotely, I think you will find greater diversity in thought, which is very important, I think, for the types of platforms that you both represent. Now, I'd like to move on to an entirely different topic, and since I began my career here in the Senate, I have been committed to, of course, protecting those who need it most, and folks, our children are the most in need, and it's our job as lawmakers to respond to the ongoing threats against them. And social media has created a whole new world for all of us, and it can help us share that information and resources with the public about human trafficking and child exploitation, and it can also help us keep track of sexual predators and ensure our children are safe from those known threats. And in fact, I've been working on legislation that would help update what information sexual predators have to provide about their online identities. And as we all know, however, social media can also be incredibly harmful. Child sexual abuse material, CSAM, is present on nearly every single social media platform that exists. And in such polarized times, I am grateful that it is this subject that we do find, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, we can come together to find solutions for this issue. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I know that you and I touched upon this briefly last week when we spoke over the phone, and I do hope, Mr. Dorsey, that you also share Mr. Zuckerberg's commitment to fighting these types of issues on your platforms. So just very briefly here, as I'm running out of time, but Mr. Zuckerberg, I do understand that Facebook is planning to outfit Facebook Messenger with end-to-end encryption. And how do you hope to prevent the dissemination of child sexual abuse material if neither law enforcement nor you can access that messenger data? Is there some sort of apparatus that you will have in place that can help law enforcement with those situations? And then Mr. Dorsey, will go to you next as well.
Senator, thank you for this. I think you're right on every count in what you just said, both that child sexual exploitation is one of the gravest threats that we focus the most on. And it is also an area that will face new challenges as we move to end-to-end encryption across our messaging systems. Of course, the reason why we're moving to encryption is because people want greater privacy and security in their messaging systems, and over time are choosing systems that can provide them more privacy and security. And that's something that I think it makes sense for us to offer. I think encryption broadly is good, but it is going to mean that we're going to need to find and develop some new tactics. A lot of what we have found around the best ways to identify bad actors on our system is not actually by looking at the specific content itself, but by looking at patterns of activity and where is it that a group or a person is not behaving in the way that a normal person would, so you can flag and review that. And we've grown increasingly sophisticated at that. That goes across the foreign interference prevention work that we do, and it also will be a factor here. And I'd be happy to follow up in more detail on what we have planned. But overall, I would say that this is something that we're very focused on, and I agree with your concern.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Dorsey, you as well. So those that are on Twitter, making sure that law enforcement would have access, if at all possible. If you could give me an overview of that, please.
Yeah, child exploitation is absolutely terrible, and we don't tolerate it on our service at all. We regularly work with law enforcement to address anything that we see, inclusive of the patterns that Mark has mentioned. The majority of Twitter is public, so we don't have as much activity in private channels. So it's a different approach, but it's still, we still see the same activity, and it's one of our highest priorities in terms of the severity of harm.
Thank you both very much for being accessible to us today. I truly appreciate your input, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Zuckerberg, I really want to appreciate what Facebook has done in the area of sexual exploitation of children. Y'all have done a very good job of trying to help law enforcement in that area.